Hi there. Today in the series on Special Forces we're going to review a book which really is probably the first inside look at the post-Borneo modern SAS, and it's this one, Soldier I. It was written by Michael Paul Kennedy, but it's actually the story of Pete W. He doesn't want his name used, so he uses just his initial, Pete W., who served with the SAS, having passed selection in 1970. So the book starts, and it's probably again one of the first to give you a real look at the selection course from the inside. And they were welcomed by Johnny Watts, the colonel at the time, and he gave them a real talk about the regiment and what selection was about. And then off they go. There's a lot of inside looks at the other guys on selection with him. Out of the four guys that he was sort of bashed up with, only one other passed. The hills phase, increasing distances and so on, the terrible wind on the top of the hills, and the absolutely relentless physical grind which built up to the final endurance, which in those days was 46 miles with 55 pounds in a bag, and plus rifle, belt kit, water, etc. He passes. It doesn't then go into continuation jungle and combat survival. He just mentions they happen, and then he's off to the squadron, B squadron, full of characters. And at the time the Dhofar campaign was running, so he's off to Dhofar, and the squadron commander was Duke Perry, and there's a lot of action, and one of the major things they were involved in was called Op Jaguar, and I've spoken to a couple of the guys who are involved in that, and they all said it was harder than selection, and it made them understand what selection was about. It was a climb up the Jebel, and tremendously arduous, leading to a fight at the top. So then in 72 there was the Battle of Merbat, and there was a small group of SAS who were basically on a training task in Merbat, where there was a fort, and unbeknownst to them there was a whole mass of the opposition, the Adu, ready to attack them. And there's mention of the two Fijians who were there, Laba Laba and Takavisi. Laba Laba unfortunately was killed. Takavisi was severely wounded. Opinion in the SAS of the guys who were around at the time says Laba Laba should have got a Victoria Cross. There were 5 Fijians served in B Squadron, and 1 served in D Squadron, and they all were phenomenal soldiers, and all were decorated for gallantry. So they were a real contribution to the SAS. So Merbat was a really major turning point. They did manage to fend off the opposition. They were vastly outnumbered, but they kept the fight going. Just by chance, G Squadron had arrived for the handover, and they were able to join in. So it was a close run, but they prevailed. So He then mentions Northern Ireland, very, very brief mention really, and not that much detail because of the secrecy at the time, and it was still very sensitive stuff, the SAS role over there. And then he is sent to Hong Kong on a training job, working with the Hong Kong police, gets into trouble in the bars and is arrested and is sentenced to the cane, and he has 6 strokes of the cane on his backside, which he tough SAS soldier says was incredibly painful, and he had to fly back face down in the aircraft, and he is RTU, returned to unit for nominally 18 months. Goes back to the Royal Engineers, and then chomping at the bit, goes back to Hereford, they put him through some of the selection, say he's fit enough, and then he goes back to his squadron. Just in time for the embassy siege. And here again is probably the first insider account of the embassy operation, which again, B Squadron was in the right place at the right time. And he describes getting the call when they were actually training in the killing house, and the beepers go off, and it's a live op. Drive down to London, they get housed, start doing planning, start doing rehearsals, do a recce over the roofs. They find they've got a guaranteed entry point through a skylight that they can use if all else fails. They start working on the deliberate plan, and or just waiting for the go, and hostage is killed, and that's the signal, and the SAS is sent in. And you know, despite it being an internationally important counter-terrorist event, you've still got the normal British Army humour. And he talks about one of the guys, it turned out it was John McLeish, was playing with a little toy frog, and they were all watching the snooker when they get the call to go. And then they go off, clear the embassy, do the business, and when they go back into the holding area, the first question they ask the police in there is who won the snooker. And the police just can't believe how laid back these guys are. So a couple of years after the embassy siege is the Falklands, and again the build-up training starts. Now for the Falklands, they sent D and G squadrons over, and there wasn't really a role for B Squadron. A Squadron was on counter-terrorist. I just, a little story, a guy I worked with on a team, Jimmy, we were working when they were renaming Bradbury lines Sterling lines, and there was a big ceremony, and I said, are you going down to the camp for the ceremony? And he said, no, I'm still bitter. I said, why is that? He said, they wouldn't let us go to the Falklands. So I said, well, you were A Squadron, you know, you had to stay. No, he said, they should have let us go to fight. He was a really aggressive jock. So anyway, the B Squadron's told to start planning for insertions into an airbase on the mainland, where they will fly in with 2 C-130s, land, debus with vehicles as well, and brass up the entire airfield, all the jets, kill all the pilots, and then basically evade overland as best they can. So they're practicing this up on the up in airfields in Scotland, and they quickly find it's impossible to penetrate a defended coastline with the radar and detection methods, particularly using cargo aircraft. Anyway, during the build-up, the squadron commander, John Moss, expresses his doubts about all this, and he's sacked by DLB, and nevertheless the operation goes ahead. Ian Crook takes over, and they go down to Ascension to launch, and they're all set to go, and it's cancelled by the RAF, who finally get their way and say that, look, this is mission impossible. So instead, the plan is to do a water jump from the C-130s to the fleet, and then reinforce the existing squadrons. So off they go. One of the Hercs has mechanical problems, turns back, but the one that Pete's on continues, and they do a reinforcement jump into the ocean. And then not really much happens on the islands, because it's just about the time that the Argentinian forces surrender. So after that, he is put onto CRW, Counter-Revolutionary Warfare Wing, basically training people in counter-terrorism and CQB. So really interesting book. It's like many of the subsequent books, filled with squaddy humour. It's filled with characters. B Squadron seemed to be just full of characters who could each write a book or make a film in their own right. And as one of the first books, it's excuse me, certainly still one of the ones that's well worth reading.